commission to order. Let's start with the approval for the minutes from December 12th. Someone make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Okay. We'll start with Andres.
Yay.
Brenda.
Yay.
Adrian.
Yes.
Carolyn.
Agree.
Weston.
Yes.
Sarah.
Abstain.
Amy.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Okay, the minutes are approved. The chair has nothing to report. Vice chair
Nothing to report.
and director.
Nothing but welcome back and hope you had a happy holiday.
Thank you. So let's jump right into this. The Geronimo Shop conditional use and plan development. Mayara? Yeah. Yeah? Mayara?
Yes,
Okay.
that's right. Okay. All right, so this is a request by Marco and Melinda Geronimo, the property owners, to change the use of 1330 South, 700 West from residential to commercial. Currently, there's a single-family dwelling and a large garage on the property. The applicants would like to demolish the single-family dwelling to accommodate an office and retail building and to repurpose the existing accessory structure into a warehouse. This project is being presented to the commission because it requires conditional use and plan development approval. The conditional use is due to the property being located in the R1 7,000 zoning district and the transitional overlay district. In the transitional overlay district, some commercial uses are allowed through the conditional use process. The plan development is required in order to preserve and convert the existing garage and to allow additional signage for the retail uses. So here on the site plan, we're able to see that the warehouse building is located in the rear, is within the setbacks, the side yard setbacks and the rear setbacks, rear yard setback, sorry, and also the buffer that is required in the overlay district. The project consists of demolishing the existing single family, like I said before, and replacing it with a new two-story building that will accommodate retail on the first floor and office on the second floor. The existing warehouse, the existing accessory building converted into a warehouse will be preserved as is. The new building will have facades that combine brick veneer and stucco and will have detailing in metal and wood. The main entrance to the building will be centered in the front facade and display windows will be located on each side of the main entrance. There will also be display windows on the side facades. The elevation on the top is the front and rear facade, and the one on the bottom is the side elevation. And you can see the sign over the display windows. They are proposing two signs over the display windows on three facades: the north, the front, the rear, and the north, which is the side. The accessory building will remain visually intact, except for potential changes to the doors and some additional lighting. As seen in the photograph, this building is made of cinder block and features 5 garage doors and 5 men doors. The staff reports list 3 key considerations regarding this proposal. The first is the neighborhood compatibility. The properties to the north are single family. The properties to the south and the east are commercial. The proposed development proposes direct retail on the retail portion, which in intensity is not different from the existing commercial there right now. In terms of design, the applicants are proposing materials found in some residents in the area, and that adds some interest and scale to this building. The square box shape of the building and the two-story height also follows the appearance of the commercial buildings in the area without imposing over the residential structures. The cinder block building was built at least 30 years ago and is not changing visually. So the two pictures above are the single-family dwellings right north to that property, and then the picture on the bottom is right across the street. The second key consideration is the impact to the residential uses, to which the applicant proposed to address with some mitigation strategies. To address the visual impacts, the applicants proposed a new building that relates to the existing structures on the block in terms of scale, massing, shape, and materials, and acts as a transition between the larger commercial uses and the single-family dwellings. The parking lot was proposed behind the new building and hidden from public view, and the existing cinder block building will have limited visibility from the public street. As far as the additional signs requested, they will be placed on secondary facades of the buildings and will be no larger than allowed by the overlay district. Regarding the noise impact, the applicants are proposing the parking stalls closer to the south property line and away from the residential properties to the north. The driveway and the required landscaping and fence will also provide some distance between the commercial building and the residential areas. In terms of traffic, the new uses will only operate during business hours when traffic is already significant on 700 West and also on 13th South. The third consideration was the consistency with adopted master plans. The future land use map of the West Side Master Plan designates the subject property as 700 West industrial areas. The master plan acknowledges that some conflict between uses may occur and focuses on the goal of providing appropriate land use buffers and urban design features to soften the transition between the industrial districts and adjacent neighborhoods. With that, the planning staff finds that the proposed development is compatible with the mix of uses currently found in the immediate area. It is also in line with the transitional overlay purpose statement, the West Side Master Plan, and it generally meets the standards for conditional use and a plan development, as discussed in the staff report. Therefore, the planning staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve the proposal subject to complying with all applicable regulations and the conditions listed in the staff report, which relates to the final approval of the plans.
Any questions for staff?
So I have a question, and it may be Wayne is the one who's going to answer this. So I'm a little confused because last year we had a project that was not demolishing a single-family home, but turning it from residential to an office. And part of that report, and maybe so I thought it was Plan Salt Lake, but it could be something else, was requiring that if they take housing, they have to replace it. And that was a big part of that particular proposal. And this one, that didn't even get mentioned. And so I am inquiring as to, I think I need either a refresher on that particular standard and why it doesn't apply here, but did apply in another instance.
So in conditional uses, mitigation of housing is required, except if the master plan is foreseeing something, an use that is not residential. And in this case, the master plan calls for industrial. So they're not required to provide a mitigation report.
That's in the housing mitigation ordinance. If it's actually, I mean, we have very little zoning districts that, where housing like single-family homes is not an allowed use, but the industrial area is one of those. And so because this is identified in the master plan as transitioning to light industrial, then the housing mitigation ordinance doesn't come into play.
Okay, thanks.
What are the boundaries on the transitional overlay? Is it that whole block all the way to 13th South, or
No, it's
is that whole?
kind of hard to see, but it's just that particular lot and the vacant lots behind it.
So that whole R1 7000 that's along 1300 South is not in the transitional overlay? So this is on the boundary of the transitional overlay. Is that correct?
It's in between the M1 and the R17, which includes
It
that.
is the transition.
It is the transition, so one lot. It's not like that whole, those are,
Oh, no.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I see, it is on there.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see.
Hash marks.
More questions for staff right now? No? Thank you. We'll bring the applicant up. State your name for the record. You have 10 minutes to
10 minutes, that's a lot.
tell us about your project.
Sure. Marco Geronimo, my wife, Melinda Geronimo, over here. And I don't know if I'm going to take all 10 minutes, but just to let you know, it's on a personal background. This is a project that my wife and I embarked just because we wanted to have something for our kids, for the family, something that's long-term. So we're vested in this project and in the community, but also because we figure that it'll be a good project also to improve the community outlook and bring the industrial and neighbors together.
Okay, does anybody have questions for the applicant? No, they're being really quiet tonight. Thank you. You can step back if you don't
Thank
have
you.
anything else.
Appreciate that.
And we will open the public hearing on this item. Is there anyone from the community council? Are you from the community council?
I'm not the community council, but I own the home just north, directly
Okay,
adjacent to
okay.
the highway.
So give me just like 10 seconds here. So seeing no one from the community council, is there somebody from the public who would like to speak on this? So come up, say your name for the record, and you have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Kate Whedon, and I own the property directly north, the corner lot right there. It's a half-acre lot. I think that the structure will be nice. It'll be a great improvement to that area. First, when I saw it and I looked at the plans online, I was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, the traffic, but if it, was within like normal business hours and things like that, I do think it will help improve, and I think it'll be nice. But my question is, with my property literally being, right next to it, and with it being a 2-story structure, like how, is there, plans for like fencing or additional sort of privacy, any sort of, landscaping, anything that will sort of, because I feel like now with that being, it's a single story now, so with a double story, anytime I'm in my backyard having family dinners or anything, well, I feel like that everybody's watching over, and I think that that's the only thing that's different. But, that's just, the one question I would have is either doing a large hedge or some sort of fence or something like that, just to, sort of give that privacy that we have had in the past. But as far as the structure itself, I think it'll be nice, because as you saw the photo, I mean, the house is old. I mean, I love old houses, and old architecture. It's sad to see something like that torn down, but with that area and the way it is, I think that we'll improve it. Because right now it's sort of cinder blocks with like weeds out in front, and they, hasn't really been kept up. So that's my only question and the thing I would like to point out. So.
We'll ask
Okay,
later. Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to speak on this item? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back up to the commission. Can we get staff to come up? Can you answer the question about buffering along that side with that residential property?
Yeah. So the height of this building is 23 feet. In an R1 7000, it's allowed, a single-family dwelling is allowed to go that tall. But in regards to the additional buffering, they are required to have a buffer along the property line with a fencing, a solid fence, 6 foot tall, and there are requirements for bushes and trees at a certain spacing, 30 feet. They have provided a landscape plan. We do need a final plan that complies with all the overlay landscaping requirements, and that was one of the conditions of approval.
So it looks like the access to the parking lot behind is on the north side.
Yes.
So how wide is that? I can't really read those. I
That
can't.
will be 24 feet,
So there's 24 feet, and then what's the landscape then along the fence line?
8 feet.
So we've got potentially 32 feet of distance between the property on the north
Yeah, and they're actually.
from the structure.
And they're actually proposing the building a little setback from that driveway as well.
Oh, and so there's an additional along the building.
There's an additional 5 feet or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we've got well over 35 feet of so the building will be that far away from the property on the north. Okay.
Anybody else have any other questions?
Probably a quick one. What's the, in your staff report, you say that this kind of commercial use is not permitted in the transitional zone, and so that's why the conditional use is needed. What is it about this kind of commercial use that's
No.
not permitted?
So the
Did I misread it?
transitional overlay lists certain commercial uses that could be approved through the conditional use. Not going through the conditional use, they're only allowed uses permitted in the R1 7,000, so single family and,
So commercial uses are allowed in the R1?
they're not allowed.
Oh, they're
in
not
the
at
R-
all?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay. I gotcha.
But the transitional overlay lets that
Let's that happen.
happen.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
It's not just to put in a little context, there's 3 areas in the city that the transitional overlay is located, and each one of them only contains a couple of parcels. So you don't see this very often. It's a kind of a strange overlay zone that we don't actually even deal with very often. And you probably won't even maybe see anything beyond this, but there's this particular area, there's one over in between 8th and 9th South, just on 200 East, and then one way west, out 5600 West at like 14th South. So it's one of these interesting transitional zones that was set up thinking that, okay, we have an existing residential area. At some point, the master plan says it's going to transition to something else, but we're not quite ready to do that full rezone yet and make all those single-family homes non-conforming. So let's do this kind of in-between zoning district that says you can go and you could put a commercial use as a conditional use in that zone or on that particular property. If it's in this zone, it kind of acts as this buffer in between the more commercial uses and the residential use.
Anyone else? Questions, discussion? Somebody ready to make a motion?
I think it's a very nice project. Looks very good to me. So,
You're not going to make a motion? I thought you were about to do that.
Come on, Andres, you,
I didn't
you
want
were
me
right
to.
there.
sure, I'll go ahead and make a motion. Regarding petition PLN PCM 2018-00158 and PLN SUB 2018-00240, based on the information listed in the staff report and the information presented and the input received during the public hearing, I move that the Planning Commission approve the request for conditional use and plan development for the redevelopment property at 1330 South 700 West as presented in petitions as listed before, with the conditions listed in the staff report.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion by Andres, second by Sarah. Matt?
Yes.
Amy?
Yes.
Sarah?
Yes.
Weston?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Adrian?
Yes.
Brenda?
Yes.
Andres?
I want to thank you for the opportunity to make the first motion of the year. Oh, yes.
Thank you. The motion passes. Okay, we'll move on to our next item, the Svensson Condominiums Plan Development. We have Casey.
Thank you. This next item also includes a plan development aspect to it. Up on the screen, you can see the site. It's on a corner site on 1700 South and Major Street, which is between State Street and Main Street. The address is 48 East, 1700 South. Currently, the property has an existing single-family dwelling on it, as you can see in this picture. This proposal is a redevelopment proposal to demolish that home and replace it with a 4-unit residential condominium building that would be 3 stories tall. The zoning district that this is in is Corridor Commercial, or CC. It's also within the South State Street overlay, or excuse me, South State Street corridor overlay, which adds a few additional design requirements to properties that are within that area. So here are the proposed renderings of the project. The top left picture is looking from 1700 South, and then the bottom right picture is further down on Major Street, looking more towards the north and east. All 4 units, as you can see, would front onto Major Street as far as their main entrance doors and their garage doors. And the yellow colored balconies that you see on the 2nd and 3rd levels actually extend across the property line into the public way, and the applicant is aware that those would need a lease between the city and them and the applicant to have those hanging over city property. Here are the architectural elevations. In reviewing this project, really there's only one item that's requiring it to come before you this evening, and that's the number of driveways proposed. Otherwise, this project could proceed to a building permit. Let me see if I can find the site plan here. So on this site plan, you can see Major Street along the bottom of the image, and there are 2 proposed driveways. One driveway would service 2 units. The city code requires that driveways be spaced at least 100 feet apart when they're on the same property. That's difficult on this particular property because the property is only roughly 100 feet long, just slightly more than that. And so they would only be allowed typically 1 driveway. And they're asking for 2 driveways in this case. So that's the reason that it's before you tonight. Staff has looked at this, and because Major Street is a dead-end street for this portion here, it doesn't seem to get a lot of traffic. So that creates less conflict between vehicles and pedestrians and other vehicles. So staff is comfortable with the proposal of 2 driveways. Also, the overall purpose of the project is, falls in line with the master plan for this area, which is a central community master plan, anticipating this to be an area where we'd like to see a little more residential opportunity, different types of housing. So this transitions from a single-family style to a multifamily style, offering a slightly different price point. So it supports the master plan in that regard. There are 2 key considerations or key issues that came up with this particular project in reviewing it. The first one is the number of driveways, which I've touched on. The second, it pertains to the facade along 1700 South, which is the top left image in your screen. There is a standard in the plan development standards that speaks to pedestrian engagement and architectural features along public ways. In this particular case, the design meets the basic zoning standards for the CC zoning district as far as percentage of glass and spacing of, the length of a blank wall without some sort of window or door or feature to it. So it meets those basic standards, but the plan development is looking for a little bit more as far as pedestrian engagement. And we feel, staff feels that this particular facade is lacking for that along 1700 South, which is a transit corridor. There'll be some changes to that street as well to install a bike lane, so there'll be some more pedestrians because of that. So as you'll notice in our recommendation for the project, we overall are fine with the project and recommend that it be approved, but with a condition that more features be included on that ground floor there of that particular facade. We give two options in the recommendation. They can either do two specific things that we name, which is create those 3 glass panes on the right side of that facade into a doorway and make that the main entrance, and then put a canopy over it. Or the applicant could opt to install 3 different features of their choosing if they didn't want to get as specific as staff has recommended. So those are the issues. Again, staff has reviewed the standard, feels that it complies with those, and supports the master plan, recommends approval with that condition that I mentioned.
Thank you, Casey. Any questions for staff right now?
What's the length of that facade on 17th South?
The lot is 40 feet wide. That facade, $40 feet minus 3.5 feet minus 2.5 feet, so 34 feet.
Anyone else? Okay, why don't you step back and we'll bring the applicant up. Would you state your name for the record, and you have 10 minutes.
Paul Svensson, thank you for having me. Casey did a good job of explaining the project, and he's been really good and responsive to work with. Let me just explain quickly the inspiration for this. I'm not sure how well you can see it on these little renderings, but the idea of this is to be sort of evocative of a stack of shipping containers without being like overly annoyingly literal about it. The building is not made of shipping containers, but with the exception of the dividers between the patio, which are going to be salvaged shipping container doors. The exterior materials are all corrugated metal. There is no stucco. There's no cultured stone. This is not your typical uninspired, least common denominator townhouse project that we've all seen plenty of, unfortunately. So that takes me around to the request for changes on 17th South. There are a couple of things I just wanted to mention. One is that I personally think that the aesthetics of this project are very intentional, and I think they're going to positively affect the community, especially that immediate surroundings, really dramatically. And the frontage facing 17th South is quite narrow. It's only 34 feet. So it's not like we have an immense blank wall. Also, Casey mentioned that we're in the South State Street corridor overlay. The overlay has heightened requirements for the street-facing facades that the regular CC zone does not. And specifically, it's a 40% glazing requirement on the ground level for non-residential uses, 25% glazing on the ground level for residential uses. So we've already upped our game and complied with that. The specific suggestions that staff have made are a little troubling to me. One is, 3 architectural elements. Does that mean we could do 3 Corinthian columns and we'd be okay? Why 3? Why not 2? Why not 4? To me, this project is of a piece. It's very intentional, and I don't want to muck with it particularly. I really hate the idea of putting another entry door on it. First of all, there's a requirement under the overlay that we add an operable door on any street-facing facade. So we've already got a glass door there on the left going into the garage, which is totally stupid. There's no reason for that other than the zone. We're complying with it, but it's dumb. The other thing is that we're not going to move the entry door off of Major Street because the whole design principle behind this is really intense symmetry. So if, as staff suggested, we put another entry door where the 3 divided windows are on the northwest corner, that means we will have an entry door entering into another entry door, which is just dumb. I really understand and sympathize with the motivation here, but I think the suggestion of tweaking the facade with kind of a generic tool out of the typical planner toolkit just isn't warranted here, and I think it would harm rather than help the street frontage. That's really my only point. If there are any questions I can answer, I'm happy to.
Anyone?
Are the garage doors glass?
Yeah. They have to be under the glazing requirement of the zone.
I don't believe we have any pictures, perhaps I'm wrong, of the street frontage along 1700 South that's actually next door to your project. Do we have any? It's a parking lot? Okay.
On Major Street, it's a parking lot. On 17th South, there's a noodle restaurant and a Maverick, maybe? Gas station?
Yeah.
The noodle restaurant is set back, so you drive in, it's a parking lot, and then the
Oh,
building
right,
is
the
set
parking
back.
for the restaurant is in, that's right. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Any other thoughts for discussion with Paul? Okay, I don't see any, so if you'd step back, please. We will go to the public hearing on this project. Do we have a representative? I'll open the public hearing. Do we have a representative from the community council? Are you with the community council? Okay, hang on a second. Okay, if there's no one from the community council, is there someone else from the public who would like to speak on this? Why don't you come up, state your name, and you have 2 minutes.
Take that one.
Speak into the microphone, please.
Hi, good evening. My name is Hugh Coltharp. I own the building 2 doors to
You need to
the-
get up to the microphone.
My name is Hugh Coltharp. I own the building 2 doors east. There's the house that's there now that they're talking about, the noodle restaurant, and I own the shop building there that's next to that. And then there is the Shell station on the corner. It's not a Maverick, it's a Shell station. I'm more than happy to see this go in because that house has been a real eyesore down there. And I think this will be a real improvement to the area. As far as the windows and door on 17th South, I don't think that's a real good idea for a couple reasons. I have personally pulled 2 stuck cars over the years. I've been there 40 years, and I've seen cars in the winter crash up over the side there, and I think a building without glass windows is a good idea. Plus, that's kind of ground zero for the transient folk, and if they want to break into something, those glass doors are going to be real good for that. I think a solid piece of steel across there is a real good idea. And I like the looks of the thing. I think it's going to be good. As far as his cuts, driveway cuts on Major's not all that busy. And I think it'll be okay when people backing out. I don't think there's a dog crematorium or an animal crematorium 2 doors south on there, and I believe it's still an advertising agency across the street on Major, and they don't get a lot of traffic. They have traffic for about 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes at night when they leave. And the animal crematorium's a non-event. I mean, they have people come and go, but it's never busy. So I think it's a real plus for the neighborhood, and be nice to see it get put in.
All right, thank you.
I have a question for you, Hugh, really quick. Is the parking on the south end of that lot, is that your parking?
No, that's owned, at least the last time I checked on it, that was owned by the folks that own the advertising agency.
Okay, thanks.
I don't hold me to that, but I think that is, and it only goes up part way. The city has an easement further up there.
Is there anyone else who'd like to speak on this? Seeing no one, I'll close the public hearing and we'll bring it back to the commission. And Casey, you want to come back up and
I have a few questions for staff.
okay?
So that area is zoned CC, right? And do we envision the rest of 17 South kind of coming up as it gets redeveloped, coming up all the way to the sidewalk? Or is it going to be more of this kind of staggered set back and forth as it goes, based on what the zoning kind of allows and permits?
You're talking about the section along State Street,
Along 17 South, yeah.
17 South. The,
In the big picture, what I'm trying to get at is, from a pedestrian standpoint, what's beyond the 34 feet? Like, is it going to be visually interesting? Is it going to be a series of parking lots and not really interesting? I mean, the zone, it calls for stuff to kind of come all the way.
right. Yeah, there's no front setback requirement, so we're encouraging buildings to come closer to the street.
But the lots are kind of small and narrow. Most of those ones in that area looks like.
Yeah, in that area, correct.
And then in the landscaping that's kind of shown with some hedges that kind of flow along 17 South and that tree, that's all within the plan development plan that we're approving tonight, correct? If we approve it.
That particular plan would be part of this approval.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Any other questions for staff? I guess you're off the hook.
So I do have a question, actually. The applicant is fairly clear that he believes that his design is responsive both to the criteria of openness as well as to the intention of the main side of the facade. How is it that you came to a different conclusion?
Given that it's a pretty flat, so looking at the west elevation that's on the right side there, it's kind of along that left edge, a pretty flat, and it's 30 feet tall, not a lot of relief, not a lot of architectural interest there. So
You're talking about the west elevation?
yeah, looking at the west elevation,
Which is the
left,
one on the major elevation?
Yes.
Major street elevation.
so the left edge of that, kind of looking at it from the side.
Well, I'm looking at it from the corner, which would be the way you would look at it, this one.
Okay, so yeah,
Okay, that one, yeah.
corner facing
Right,
1700 South.
Right. So there is less detail on that, what would be the north property.
Right.
right?
Right.
There's less detail there, but why is that? You know, it does respond to the 25% glass and so forth. Why is it that you believe that this is essentially, I think, why are you coming to that conclusion, I guess is my question.
I'm sorry, state that
Why are
again.
you coming to that conclusion? Just because it's flat?
Yeah, because it's flat, it doesn't have, I mean, it has glass on there, which meets the basic standard, but once you get into a planned development, it's looking for a little bit more as far as pedestrian engagement and architectural features. We feel like the proposal didn't quite meet that.
Well, I happen to disagree with that, not because I don't agree that this side is kind of flat, but because we don't see things as straight on like that. We actually see something when we're walking down the street. We would walk from west to east here, and we would look, if we went from west to east, we would see the entire front of this property as we walked and crossed the street. We would see the part on Major Street that's got a lot of detail and balconies and so forth. So I don't think you would perceive this project as being very blank wall at all, since that facade is much longer and more visible. This is not as if the property were, that little bit of frontage was the only thing you could see from 17th South. You're going to be able to see all of the building. So I don't think you really have, I don't think it's enough of an issue here to compromise what I think the owner is saying is a consistent design throughout his project. So I would not go along with that particular, because it's also kind of a random request, you know, to do something. So I would not go along with that particular condition.
We tried to engage the applicant to.
Yeah, he doesn't want to do that.
I
It's clear.
understand, yes, he's clearly stated that. So we're really just looking for maybe a canopy, so.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for the applicant. Do you want to?
Paul, would you come back up, please?
I'm just wondering if you, along that 17 South side, if you either considered anything like larger windows or like on the second floor, not the bottom floor, or anything along this, like in that. I don't know what's in that second floor living area. It's not that big of a deal, but larger windows that give it more of a, less of a side building look, more of a corner building look, or if that disrupts your design. I mean, maybe bathrooms in there, which makes you can't
we
do
hadn't
that.
considered it. I think it would probably be physically possible. If I were going to channel my architect, I am guessing he is saying that the dimensions of the horizontal are trying to echo the dimensions of the vertical on the street-facing facade. And I actually think, as I'm spouting right now, I actually think there's something to that. I mean, if there is a overwhelming feeling that we've underglassed the sides, I'm open to that. But given how much glass we have coming into the living space on the west, to me, it doesn't seem like it's a big factor. But I'm open to suggestions.
No, I mean, I don't want to go like way far down that road, but just, I mean, you are a corner building, right, which provides some opportunities. You yourself, because you've been before this body a number of times, are making significant investments and improvement to this neighborhood. And just because it is a corner building, and maybe that's good and bad for residential sort of perspective, to highlight that sort of, you know, because there is going to be activity on the street, and there's going to be engagement, and there's businesses and shops, and it has a lively, and I was just wondering if that was ever thought through or thought part of the building, rather than here, it's like you definitely have I think your front is pretty appealing, but, you know, it's not the side, it just looks like a side. I don't really have any more thoughts than that, but.
Well, that,
And I agree, I agree with Brenda, like you're walking, you're not gonna, from major, although if you are coming from the other angle, when you see the back and the back corner, it will be more looking like you're looking at the back of a building. But it's just a question if you guys explored that or not.
We hadn't. The only other thing I was going to say is in response, or sort of echoing a question you asked earlier, is that as we're looking at it here, we're seeing it devoid of all the landscaping. And, we engaged a really good landscape architect. I think what he has proposed for the 17th South frontage is really nice. It's going to be better than anything within a half mile. And we are committed to doing that. We're required to as part of our approval.
Yeah. I think what you have working in your favor is it's a relatively short distance, unlike a lot of other projects we see in this group. And then 2, that you've got a lot of heavy detailing on Major Street, and then 3, that you've got landscaping.
Yep.
That is pretty involved and feels like it's something. But if you were to add something, it seems like I see the feature thing would be, I don't know if I agree with that, but something would be an amenity to and more light into the space anyways would be something that would, depends on what you have in the inside of the building too.
So I tend to agree with what you're saying to some extent. I think I'm pretty much there, but I'm not quite there because we have so many of these projects that come in front of us that are the lots that are turned sideways. What are they called again?
Slots.
Slots. And this is different because it does have, it's a public street and not a private road. But ultimately, it's kind of the same because it's something turned to the side and it's facing, the north side is facing a street, and this other street is facing a road that, even though it's named Major Street, is not very major. And so it's kind of the same thing. So I guess I'm asking for help to talk me through that so that I think Brenda knows why it's different. How is it different? If we're going to hold all the other projects to a standard that they need to have more of a facade that
if this lot were in an internal lot, in other words, if there were housing on one side and housing on the other side, and the main facade here, were facing another house, so that as I approach this building, I wouldn't even really, then there's a set of facade, that's all I see. I don't see the backyards and all of that stuff. Here you see the whole thing, and particularly because of the width
the
of
public road is
17th
so
South. If you
wide.
look at the photo on...
Well, also Major Street, right? You're saying also because
Yes,
Major Street is so
yes.
much wider than a private road would be.
Right, so if you actually look at the street picture, which is on page, I forget. Okay, so there's a photo of the only contextual photo we have, actually. Yeah, it's in the applicant's narrative, I believe.
Yeah, but I see that
If you
point.
look at that photo, you could see how much you can see the entire length of that property from across the street and from down the street. So
Right.
I would think that's why it's different. I would completely agree if this were enclosed within 2 other properties, that the front needed to have more of a front.
Right.
And we have demanded that in most cases of these slot homes.
But what
properties.
about all the people walking east to west? They don't have that experience.
Well, I think that actually that's a, if I were going to argue that something needed a little more detail, I would argue that the back of this project, because if you look at the back facade being the east facade, it's,
So I'm going to say that I have serious reservations about the 1700 South side and the east side, because we have, during my last, I've been on for 9 months, tried to be very consistent about how we look at these things. If that came before us previously, with no delineation of units on that east side, we've had issues with that. This is a 1700 South. If you went a little bit west, we've got 2 other developments happening right now. by Richard Street and on West Temple. And they are all engaging 1700 South. And here we're going to allow something that doesn't. And I'm having trouble. Right now I can't support this because I don't feel like this does anything to engage 1700 South. And then that east side, I think, is just really a bad visual representation of, and especially if you have a parking lot on the other side, it'll be very visible. That's what everybody will be seeing. And I'm not happy with how this is presented, especially given the standards that we've been applying to plan developments of this nature.
And that's why I try to figure out, I mean, I agree with what some of those comments are saying, but the veggie house will come down relatively soon, and there will be something else built on those blocks. I mean, with the way that 17 South is developing and what I think people are trying to do, like, because yes, it doesn't look that appealing as it is, but if you're going to put another similar structure, which this is what is going up all over the granary, the 9th and 9th, these sort of 3-story kind of
We're
townhome
going to want
sort of
them
buildings.
all engaging 1700 South at the
Never
very
gonna
least.
you aren't going to see the west side or the east-facing facade, and if you've got another building that's kind of right there.
Then I think I still want them all engaging 1700 South. Whatever replaces that noodle house, I still want them engaging 1700 South as those other two projects further west are. That's bringing that area
This one
up.
so clearly engages Major and it's a pretty short
And
distance. I mean, and
engages
you guys
the
know how I
dead
feel
end.
about doorways on
yeah.
streets. Like it's been my
I don't really
personal crusade.
understand the requirement on 1700 South for this project. We're talking about 30 feet. We're talking
pretty
about.
short.
It has a door.
It has a door.
It has a big window.
It has really nice landscaping. Other than redesigning their entire facade, I don't know what we would impose on them. And I think the intent here is to have the presence on Major Street, and that's the focus of the building. And then are we going to say we have to compete and have an equally important
Well,
presence?
the plan
on
development talks specifically about engaging pedestrians on that main street.
But I think that's a
This
fairly subjective
clearly-
requirement, and in this
We-
case, given the.
We can
this-
certainly disagree about that. I feel like the subjectiveness has, I'm looking at how we've been treating these in the last 10 months and trying for consistency. I don't want to redesign it because I don't think there's anything you can do to engage it the way it is now. I'm not willing to impose anything on it because I don't think it meets the plan development at all.
Saying.
Okay. I do think with looking at one of these plans that has your landscaping on it, and then you also have like a bike rack out there, are you going to paint it bright yellow to kind of go with the?
The bike rack?
Yeah, I mean, just something to kind of. Just a little touch of brightness over there. This is such an awkward property, and you do have a very unique design here.
Man, Chair, I'll make a motion.
Go for it.
First, I want to thank Casey. So I think, and maybe he says it or not, or it's intentional or not, I think Casey and his items that he's trying to push through with Paul are in direct response to the pressure this body has put on slot projects and on planners. And so the fact that he's trying to push for that, and so he doesn't have to hear it from us, I am super appreciative of. I do find this project to be unique because of its position on Major Street. And that's the only reason why, when I have almost always fought for those, I'm willing to, and it's a short distance, it's 30 feet, I'm willing to kind of overlook it here. So that's the only, but I do really, really appreciate you trying to, maybe you did intentionally, but listening to what we're trying to do with these slot homes, so thank you. So with that said, based on the information, the staff report, the information presented, and the input received during the public hearing, I move the commission approve the Svensson Plan Development, PLN SUB 2018-00812. And I'm not going to include the conditions in the staff report.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Matt and a second by Brenda. Andres?
I think it's a very nice structure, very, very lovely. I'm afraid to add anything to it because I'm afraid it actually will make it worse because it's already nice as it is, so I'll vote yes.
Brenda?
Yes.
Adrian?
Yes.
Carolyn?
Agree.
Weston?
I want to echo what Matt said as well, because I do appreciate what you were doing, and I do get it. And as I expressed in my comments, I am torn, but ultimately I think I'm falling on the side that this is different because it is on that public street. So I'll vote yes.
Sarah?
There is so much I like about this project. You've tried to be creative in a lot of ways, and I really appreciate that. But ultimately, I am not comfortable with the lack of engagement on 1700 South, so I'm going to have to vote no.
Amy?
No.
Matt?
Yes.
It's 6-2, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
We're going to
now
need
we're on
just
to
a
the work
couple of
session.
minutes to set up the next presentation. Sorry, I just cut
Oh,
you
that's
off, but
okay.
I just
No,
wanted
that's
to
fine.
Tell you that it's going to take just a minute to set it up. We couldn't get it to send over, so we'll get
Turn it the other way.
It's a cookie break.
Oh, no, we have training. We have an introduction to. I give stuff like that to my students every day, yeah.
We'll just set it right there so we don't forget it.
So unique. It just doesn't make sense to put. Like a yellow stripe or something. But I wouldn't.
Just because you're suggesting what about
Well, when you look at the landscape plan, oh, I already closed it. When I look at the landscape plan, it does have almost that feel to it. Like there's a couple of sets of things and.
like had a hedge over here, so like whoever the homeowner was maybe thought I can put some furniture out there and have like.
Well, and it does show, it did show a bike rack out there on that side too. So that's kind of like, I'm kind of, okay.
Yeah, my biggest worry is. I'm fine with it. My worry is the consistency.
It's kind of long.
That if what percentage are we sending?
It did, except I think like part of what Brenda said.
I inserted our access page right after. It's kind of like halfway through. Yeah. In this version, it's the one that shows all the trailheads. Then it kind of has the Whitehead network. So I thought it's different before. Yeah, at that point I turned over.
I'm just going to do what Adrian does from now on. It's easier.
Well, that's it. Listen to Adrian. She's a good mom, right? Or lock your children out of the house.
I don't trust parents that don't yell.
No, those sandwiches are good. Good choice. That's so funny. That's what you thought.
Are you ready?
Are ready.
All right. Carry on.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening, Commission members, Madam Chair. Thank you for having us tonight. My name is Louis Kogan. I am the Division Director for Salt Lake City Trails and Natural Lands. And this is Tom Millar. He is a Transportation Planner from the Transportation Division. Both of us were pretty intimately involved in the creation of the draft Salt Lake City Foothill Trail System Plan. I'd like to, we've got probably 20 plus minutes of presentation for you, but I would like to encourage any of you to stop us as we go through and ask any questions. I pulled a number of pages out of the plan document, which I think has been shared with all of you. But if there's anything else in the plan that we don't end up covering, please feel free to ask about it. So I wanted to start out just talking about what we hope to address with the Foothill Trail System Plan and why we decided it was important. The 1992 Salt Lake City Open Space Plan specifically recommended the creation of a comprehensive recreational trail system plan for the foothills landform area above Salt Lake City. And obviously that did not happen for many years. And over that period of time, the foothills were experiencing many issues related to a lack of planning. For one thing, the foothills, and by which I mean really just the grassy open spaces that you see when you look up above the city, that face Salt Lake City and border it on the east and north. They are owned by a number of different jurisdictional landowners that include Salt Lake City Public Lands, our group, Salt Lake City Public Utilities, the U.S. Forest Service, Utah State Parks, and this is the Place Heritage Park, and the University of Utah, as well as a number of private inholdings. And those ownerships really kind of create a bit of a checkerboard. The Bonneville Shoreline Trail Committee a number of years ago succeeded in working with all those jurisdictions and creating the Bonneville Shoreline Trail through the foothills. But before and since, there really has never been any sort of coordinated management, either of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail or the open space lands or trails around it. Above Salt Lake City, and that has resulted in the creation, kind of proliferation of a lot of what I'll call social trails or user trails that are created just because they want to go from point A to point B, and they start going there, and it creates a trail, and people follow it. Most of those trails are fall line trails, which by which I mean they follow ridge lines or gully bottoms. They're often very steep and usually associated with erosion issues, especially that the more use they get, the worse the erosion tends to become. Those types of social trails are really proliferating in the foothills, and the mapping that we did for this plan revealed that there were at least between 60 and 70 miles of unplanned unsustainable social trails in the foothills. There are very limited access, limited trailheads. So there are quite a few places where the public can access the trail system above the city, but none of those are really very formalized, and to a significant degree, you need to really know where you're going to be able to penetrate deep into residential neighborhoods and know where to park, know where you can find a sneaky trail to get onto it. There is a lack of signage, by which I mean there's virtually no signage anywhere in the foothills. And limited user experiences. That means that for people who are interested in going for a peaceful hike and getting a little further into the backcountry, or people who are looking for a certain type of mountain bike experience or what have you, those experiences are pretty limited because they haven't really ever been intentionally planned. And so whatever trail segment you get on, you might run into any type of trail user. And to a significant degree, many of the trails in the foothills are quite steep and require a lot of fitness and experience. And then finally, just there's a lack of intentional trail system design. The Bonneville Shoreline Trail was intentionally designed, but very few of the trails around it were intentionally designed. And so while we do have a network of trails, it is not really currently a very functional system. Regardless, all those things aside, the foothills are still a tremendous open space asset, and I think they are one of the most special things about Salt Lake City. They're very important to many people who live here, and to people who decide to relocate to Salt Lake City to choose to live or work here. And so we were able to identify some internal funding back in 2016 and 2017, and begin to put together an effort to create this plan. I just wanted to quickly read what the project vision was. The Foothills Natural Area will provide a variety of recreational trail experiences for all ages and abilities while managing the Foothills' environmental resources for future generations. And under that vision, we created 5 different trail system goals. We wanted to have a trail system that was environmentally sustainable, a trail system that was enjoyable for users, a trail system that was accessible to a wide variety of people of different ages and skill sets, a trail system that was safe, and also a trail system that was relatively low maintenance and physically sustainable for the long term. I wanted to introduce you to the plan area. So I'm sorry it doesn't show up perfectly clearly, but the colored area on this map represents what we identified to be as the plan area. And we chose this area because it more or less represents those primarily grassy open slopes that you can see from the city, and that descend directly to the valley as opposed to one of the creeks. So we left out of the plan area the City Creek watershed, as well as the Red Butte Creek Research Natural Area. The North Plan area, which is what we are calling this here, starts on the south. It goes from basically Victory Road and Ensign Peak all the way northward over Meridian Peak, and then to the border between Salt Lake City and North Salt Lake City. The majority of that portion of the plan area is jointly owned, well, it's owned either by Salt Lake City Public Lands or by Salt Lake City Public Utilities, and then there's a significant chunk on the very northern end that's owned by the U.S. Forest Service. The central, what we're calling the central plan area, basically runs from Memory Grove and City Creek up over Morris Meadows and across the bobsled trail, and then on its eastern end, the forks of Dry Creek Canyon. The majority of land in the central area is Salt Lake City. Again, it's a combination of Salt Lake City Public Lands and Salt Lake City Public Utilities. There are a number of private parcels right in the center of this area. The majority of those private parcels have trail easements already across them to accommodate the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and a number of spur trails. And then to the kind of southeast side of the central area, the University of Utah has their Heritage Preserve. It's owned by the university and is subject to a conservation easement held by Utah Open Lands. And then finally, the South Plan area here runs from Dry Creek, just above the Huntsman Cancer Institute, and basically all the way across the University of Utah campus and above Research Park. And then down on the southeastern side, it meets with Emigration Canyon Road. Here we have Mount Vancott, Red Butte, Mount Wire. The majority of this part of the plan area is owned by the U.S. Forest Service. There's a significant amount of ownership right along the BST, the University of Utah property, and then all the way down at the south side, Utah State Parks owns a significant chunk at This Is the Place, and Salt Lake City has a little piece as well. I think that's good enough on that. One thing that I wanted to point out, so obviously this isn't the end of Salt Lake City. the East Bench neighborhood continues further south all the way to Parley's Canyon. We made the decision to limit this initial, I guess I'll say, phase of the of Foothill Trails plan to Emigration Canyon north to North Salt Lake, because the vast majority of property here is under some form of public or institutional ownership. That is not the case for the part of the foothills that extends from Emigration down to Parley's, and so we decided that would probably be something that we could tackle as a possible future phase. We had a pretty robust public process as part of this plan effort. About a year before we formally kicked off the plan, we started a trail user intercept survey that asked a lot of really detailed questions about how people currently use the foothill trails, what their preferences are, what they like and didn't like about the foothill trail system. And we sent staff out onto the trails to engage with people and get them to answer our survey. We put up postings at every access point to the foothills. We put flyers all over town, and ultimately, over the course of a year, we generated about 1,400 to 1,500 responses, and we used that to put together an RFP to bring on board a consultant. Then in July, August of 2017, we were able to bring Alto Planning and Design on board as our Trails Plan consultant, and we were very excited to bring Alto on board because they have quite a bit of experience doing other transportation plans, both in Salt Lake City and elsewhere around the country, and we felt like they would be a great fit for this project. Pretty right around the same time, we were also doing a needs assessment survey for Salt Lake City Parks and Public Lands, and we had Y2 Analytics do a citywide statistically valid survey, and we were able to insert a couple of key questions about trail use preferences into that survey, which gave us a lot of really interesting information about how people use the Foothill Trail system citywide, as opposed to just the people who either chose to engage with us around this planning effort or the people who we were able to intercept or engage with up on the trail system. We did what we called a week-long deep dive. We brought together representatives from 37 different stakeholder groups and locked them in a room for a week. And out of that came the very first draft of a trail plan for the foothills. And then as soon as we had that, we put that up online on a really excellent interactive mapping platform that our consultant came up with for us. And that mapping platform, public engagement platform online, generated about 2,300 comments or responses. And we were extremely happy with that. We use those to revise our first version of the Trails Plan, or trail layout, and while we were revising it, we also started going out to a lot of different community councils and presenting that first version to a number of different citizen advisory boards.
Lewis, can I interrupt you?
Yes,
quick?
of course.
So can you talk about what was in those comments that generated some of those changes to the draft that you were responding to? What were the real crux of those comments that were changing how we use it and how you looked at the draft?
Sure. There were a lot of comments, obviously, but if I could try to characterize some of the themes, I would say that we were hearing from a lot of people who were saying, by and large, I think that most people were pretty happy with the original layout of the trail system that we came up with, but there was a lot of concerns about the suggested management controls that we put on those. So a lot of people were saying, well, I like this trail, but I think this should be a bicycle-only trail, or I really like this trail, but I think it should be a hiking-only trail. And that was really helpful. We also, as part of that initial plan, we were proposing new trails to be constructed and also proposing existing trails to either be incorporated into the formal trail system or not be incorporated and either abandoned or passively or actively closed by some mechanism or another. And there were a number of trails that we had not selected for that initial trail plan that people said, hold on a second, like one of the trails that you're proposing for closure is actually extremely important, and it has a lot of fans, a lot of users, and that, for a very good reason. So that those kinds of comments popped up a fair bit. We also heard from residents who lived near either proposed trails or proposed trailhead improvements that had some concerns about increasing traffic on their street or about putting people too close to their backyards, things like that. And so we did our best to address all the comments that we could. I think there was, to some degree, there were a number of people who were commenting on the plan that really wanted to see Salt Lake City's trail network become a bicycle mecca, and there were a number of people who were really fed up with bicycles and didn't want to see any bike trails. And so we were trying hard to filter the comments through a lens of, we really want a multi-use system that at the same time does allow people to have those experiences in every one of the sub areas. So trying to include multi-use trails everywhere, include some bike-only trails and some hike-only trails everywhere. And also, we also introduced a fourth type of management control, which was trails that are open to foot traffic in both directions, but only to uphill bicycles. And that management control allowed us to look at creating a lot of really interesting mountain bike loops while still providing a large number of trail segments that I think would feel safe for people who are on foot. That help? Okay. Anyways, we then went and we used the comments from the initial online mapping process to revise the plan. We decided, based on a lot of the feedback, that we might be missing a number of neighbors who live near the trail system but hadn't had a chance to participate or even be informed that we were doing this. So we decided to do a couple of open houses to make sure that even if people weren't very comfortable with the online platform, they had a chance to provide us with comments, and we sent out mailings to every house that was within half a mile of the foothills, advertising our open houses. And at the same time that we were doing the open houses, we put another version of the map back out, and we had two really successful open houses. We got about 300 participants, and then we had almost 800 participants provide additional comments on that second round of the online map. It took us quite a while to incorporate all of that feedback into another plan draft, but we kind of came up with our first almost final plan draft in August, and then initiated more of an internal review. And so we did an internal review and shared the plan with the Transportation Division, with staff at the Planning Division and Public Utilities, as well as Public Lands. That took until early December, and we are still in the process of revising and incorporating comments. And now we are obviously also in the process of going in front of you and in front of our Parks, Natural Lands, Trails, and Urban Forestry Advisory Board and City Council. And we're expecting that as we have public hearings related to that process, we'll be notifying all of the people who participated in the effort. This is another opportunity for them to engage in the plan before it's finalized. Our hope is that ultimately we have City Council formally move to adopt this planning document, and we're hopeful that we can accomplish that this year. Currently the trail plan network is 106 miles of system trails. That's virtually equivalent to the current total mileage of trails if you take into account the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and all of the various user trails and social trails that we mapped during our baseline studies. So we are proposing to construct about 65 miles of new trail, incorporate about 41 miles of existing trail into the formal trail system for that 106 miles, and then there would be another over 60 miles of social trails that we would propose not incorporating into the plan and either actively or passively decommissioning the majority of them. There are some trails that we feel like we will not be successful decommissioning them, but we also can't, in good conscience, adopt them into our formal trail system because they are unmaintainable. There's a couple of extremely steep mountain bike trails that have a few, well, maybe more than a few fans, but we feel like formalizing those trails and signing them would probably draw more traffic to them than those trails could handle. The formal trail system would include about 46 miles of multi-directional shared trails, about 26 miles of those trails that I mentioned that would be open to foot traffic in both directions, but only open to uphill mountain bikes. There would be about 17 miles of downhill mountain bike trails restricted to that user group, and then about 18 miles of hiking-only trails. As I had mentioned earlier, we are still in the process of making revisions to the plan document. Some of the most recent revisions that we've made, we've made some revisions to the phasing plan based on feedback from the different agencies, and we are starting to have a different idea of which landowners may be easier to work with than others. We've also taken a really close look at construction and maintenance costs and made some revisions since the August draft. And we've made some modifications to a couple of trail segments based on agency feedback from some of the landowning jurisdictions. By and large, the trail system has not changed very much at all since that August 2018 draft. I think the one really major change is that we have removed the trail that was proposed to loop around the uppermost section of Dry Creek for habitat security concerns. This is a kind of the full system map here, and I know it's not especially easy to see here, but I wanted to bring this up just to make sure everybody was familiar with the symbology. So the solid lines on this recommended trail system map represent trails that exist now and that we are proposing to incorporate into the formal trail system. And trails that are dotted lines represent proposed trails that we would propose constructing. The different colors represent the different management controls, multi-use, hiking, biking, or closed to downhill bicycles. The plan also includes quite a lot of information in these tables. Every single trail segment is given a name. We've identified the existing and the proposed mileage, the management control, and then there's a narrative about each individual trail segment, including what type of users it would serve, what kind of the trail experience, intended trail experience would be. And then we have also recommended creating 3 different habitat study areas in kind of the upper limits of each of the 3 sub areas where currently there is very limited recreational impact. The Trails Plan process engaged a number of environmental stakeholders, but through that process we realized that no one really had very good habitat data for this area of the foothills, and we did not feel confident moving forward with trail construction where there's currently very limited recreational impact until we had a chance to assess what impact trail construction likely would have. So for a number of the trails that are proposed for the higher elevations of the plan area, we're intending to work with some of our environmental partners to conduct a habitat study over several years, and construction of those trails would be delayed until we have more data. I think at this point I wanted to turn it over, at least for a little while, to Tom to allow him to kind of talk about access and also how the trail system would integrate with the current and future urban trail system in Salt Lake City.
Thanks, Louis. And thank you for having the time for us to present to you. So I'm a transportation planner in the Transportation Division, and we focus mostly on the planning and the design of the facilities for walking and bicycling and driving and taking the bus that are on the street. So we don't have the fun job necessarily of going for hikes in the foothills, though sometimes Louis entertains us and takes us up there, but it quickly becomes obvious that we're not geologists or environmental planners. I've been involved in the plan actually since the beginning. I worked for Alta Planning and Design before joining the Transportation Division, and so have been involved in a lot of the different steps of the plan development. What I think is most important to consider here is that the plan doesn't only recommend those linear improvements on the trails themselves, but it also recommends improvements at the trailheads where you access the trail, and particularly at those major trailhead improvements. We see a really great opportunity to connect our on-street networks with the off-street networks that Louis is working on. So kind of going from north to south, we're excited that the future 9-line trail along Sunnyside will connect to the Immigration Canyon trailhead and provide an opportunity to get to the trailhead without having to drive there, which is going to mean reduced trailhead size and reduced maintenance load, and also a lower, smaller carbon footprint as well. At the Dry Creek area or the Popperton Park area, we see that connecting to our existing 11th Avenue bike lanes, and actually those bike lanes sort of create this interesting fourth leg kind of connector on this loop that you can do with the Bonneville Shoreline Trail north of the avenues. At the City Creek Trailhead or the Bonneville Boulevard Trailhead, I consider that one of the prettiest locations where our two systems meet up. Currently, there's a fairly informal parking lot, if you will, just off of Bonneville Boulevard, and it really only fits maybe 6 or 7 cars before it's full, and then cars will fill up the parking near the gatehouse up City Creek Canyon, just a few hundred feet. So being able to connect the Foothill Trail system to Bonneville Boulevard's walking and bicycling path, as well as the paved and unpaved trails that are in Memory Grove, I think is an excellent opportunity. And then looking a little bit farther west and a little bit farther north, we see a really great opportunity to connect the future Warm Springs Park improvements that are near 200 West or 300 West with the trail system, as well as a future study of 600 North that would improve connectivity for West Side residents to the trail system, because currently they're fairly divided from that recreational asset by the railroad, by I-15, and by fairly busy roads, very busy roads that run east-west connecting those neighborhoods. And then again, this doesn't necessarily directly apply to us, but I think that connecting to North Salt Lake and the wonderful amenities that they have there, as well as their population, bringing them into our foothill area is an opportunity to bridge that divide that right now is, for the most part, filled with some refineries and some gravel pits, and it'd be nice to have a more natural ecological connection between those two. And if you have any questions about any of the street network improvements and how they would impact the trail system, I'd be happy to answer those. Welcome.
As part of the recommendations around those trailheads, the plan makes some generic recommendations about 3 different types of access points. So we've identified major trailheads, minor trailheads, and then just access points. And each of those different types sort of has a number of recommended features either associated with it or not associated with it. We have identified 5 major trailhead locations. One of those is existing. It's at Tunnel Springs, right at the boundary of North Salt Lake and Salt Lake City, and already has quite a few amenities. The others do not currently exist. Well, they exist, but not in the form that is recommended. And those include a major trailhead at Warm Springs Park, a major trailhead on Bonneville Boulevard, a major trailhead at Popperton Park, and another major trailhead at Emigration Canyon Road. All of those areas, perhaps with the exception of Warm Springs Park, currently have trail users already using them, but they're just relatively informal, with people parking along the shoulder of the road or in dirt parking areas. We've also identified 10 minor trailheads, which are locations where already there is a little bit of parking, or there's the opportunity to create a little bit of parking and at least a small formalized trailhead access point. And then we've identified 19 access points, which basically means that there is no available parking except perhaps just on-street parking in a residential neighborhood, but there is a formal legal access to the trail system. We did not go into detailed designs or cost estimates in this plan, and so we are anticipating that then that would happen in the future. We would fund the development of detailed designs and construction documents for the trail system, and we actually are submitting a capital improvement project request this coming fiscal year to do that. Also, as planning staff were reviewing the plan, they pointed out that that planning was in the process of revising the parking requirements in city ordinance, and that we should make sure before we finalized our plan that we had incorporated the most up-to-date parking requirements. And they also gave us some feedback about our recommended signage standards for signing our trailhead areas, to make sure that those were consistent with the zones in which any of these trailheads would occur. And that was helpful feedback. We went and reviewed the different zones in which our trailheads occur, and made a few small modifications to our signage recommendations to make sure that those were generally consistent. The plan, I'm not going to go into them in detail, but the plan includes a host of guidelines and best practices, including trail alignment best practices, trail construction guidelines, trail decommissioning guidelines, and also signage guidelines for both trailheads, as I mentioned, and also for wayfinding signage that will be located throughout the trail system.
Do you put a slope, like a recommended maximum slope on the trail?
Yes, we're looking at a 10% maximum average grade, but I think that those are, ultimately, it's the slope is going to depend
average
on.
grade?
What's that?
A 10% average grade?
10% maximum average grade, yeah. And I think that when we actually go to looking to construct individual trail segments, that's going to be highly dependent on the cross slope, the underlying soil and geology, and also the intended user group.
Your consultant will know a lot more than me on this subject, just for the record.
Say again?
Your consultant will know a lot more than me on this subject, but that seems like a rather steep trail. I only know this because I did trail maintenance for a summer, and we tried to build out somewhere between 6 and 8% for most access. I mean, more intense users would do more, but I just remember that one little point that we were after a 6 to 8% grade. Just a thought.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that there are some situations where, if you're building, especially like a hiking only trail on an extremely steep side slope that's trying to get, it's trying to gain elevation quickly. What we have found is that it can be possible to construct a trail as long as you're putting in grade changes as you climb. As you approach 10%, it's probably still possible to do a sustainable trail, and that it can be beneficial to look at those steeper grades where people, they really want to just get up, and that if you start building a 6% trail in those locations, even though it's much more easier from a maintenance standpoint, you can have a situation where people just keep leaving the trail and shortcutting. We wanted to leave ourselves a little flexibility, but
It's like the one fact I know about trail maintenance. I thought I'd drop it down.
It's more than me.
I would love to talk about this for a very long time.
Don't get him started, Matt.
Thank you. So I'm going to dive into trail maintenance now. It's a very fitting time here. So right now there's very minimal maintenance happening in the foothills. Our division does a little bit of maintenance, generally on a reactionary basis, and also the Bonneville Shoreline Trail Committee will generally do a couple of volunteer projects each year and do a little bit of trail maintenance. That's about it. Assurance of adequate long-term maintenance and management was a key concern for all of the jurisdictional partners, all of the landowners that we involved in the process. And our division is currently exploring different models that we could use to attempt to capture private funds to help offset the expected or the ideal annual maintenance costs for the entire trail system. So we used a rule of thumb of about 4% of anticipated construction costs as what we ought to be setting aside for annual maintenance of the physical trails. And then we also added on top of that recommended $1,500 per trail system mile for weed control. And then on top of that, some recommended funding for ranger position so that we could have some level of enforcement in the trail system. All told, across our 106-mile network, we came up with a recommended annual maintenance and management cost of just less than $420,000 a year, and we recognize that that's a lot more money than is currently being put towards management or maintenance in the trail system. And we are exploring both nonprofit partner models like what Park City has going with the Mountain Trails Foundation and a number of other communities are doing with a nonprofit partner that takes over some portion of maintenance and then does their own fundraising. And we're also looking at an endowment model where the different jurisdictions will partner with a community foundation or some other entity to to engage in a big fundraising effort to hit an endowment funding target, and then year after year, the interest on that endowment investment would be plowed back into the entity or entities that are doing the trail maintenance.
How does Draper fund its trail?
Draper has Draper has kind of a hybrid nonprofit model. They have the Corner Canyon Foundation that they work very closely with. The city of Draper has a trail crew, a small trail crew that they fund, and then the Corner Canyon Foundation also has a small trail crew, and they work together to conduct trail maintenance. The city of Draper also employs a single Foothill Trails ranger. And I know that they would like more rangers, but they've found that even a single ranger has been very effective in changing the culture down there, people respecting their management controls.
Is that enough money?
You know, I think we will learn more as the trail system comes together, and I think that it is. We've tried to make a relatively conservative estimate here, but at the same time, we don't really know just how popular, the trail system may become in the future, and how difficult it will or won't be to control noxious weeds. And
I mean, the city council and again your consultants will have better information than I will, but my sense in a plan like this, because I mean, trail maintenance is important, and it makes a big difference in the quality, and you can really tell which communities have planned trails and which ones don't, and their attractions and which ones are maintained, and who has crews that go out and repair them. And to me, it seems like you're never going to get the funding that's written in the plan. That's my general impression of how this process works. And so I would not lowball the plan. If you're going to get, that'd be my, as someone who has no control over budget. But you're never going to get the funding that you're asking for in your plan. So don't be conservative and lowball it. I would take another look at that, in my opinion.
Thank you. I love hearing that. We're getting close to the end here. We looked at creating a phasing plan, recognizing that we aren't going to be able to build 65 miles of trail and do all this all at once, and we wanted to have a phasing plan that made a lot of logical sense, and so we came up with a phasing methodology that was based primarily on three things. That was what level of public support individual trail segments received during the public input gathering process. It was based on the underlying land ownership and what anticipated processes we would need to go through, how many hoops we'd need to jump through before we could build a trail on that landowner's property, and then also whether or not we felt like it was necessary to do any habitat data collection before building a trail segment. And then we kind of put all those things together and came up with a three-part phasing plan. The phase one includes between 14 and 15 miles of new trails. Those trails are entirely on Salt Lake City and or University of Utah property, which we feel like would be the easiest ones to do first. And the estimated construction cost of those trail segments is about $620,000. We have additional estimated costs related to both active and passive decommissioning of trails. And when I say active and passive, active decommissioning is where you completely obliterate the trail. We aren't recommending too much of that because it's very costly. And then passive decommissioning is where we basically close the entrance to a social trail and put a sign up that says this trail is closed, and we obliterate the first 100 feet of it. We are also anticipating significant costs related to trailhead improvements, but obviously those haven't been carefully calculated yet. And then we are anticipating about $100,000 in costs related to signage for the trail system. The total total cost that we're estimating for implementation of the plan, or for build-out, is just shy of $3 million. Phase one, I thought I'd share with you, looks like this. So primarily, we are proposing improvements that are kind of in the central section of the plan area. We're proposing, this was our most popular proposed trail alignment, which was an alternate to Dry Creek, and would allow a separate downhill mountain bike trail, and then all other users could be on a alternate trail segment up Dry Creek. We think that would resolve a lot of conflicts and make for a much more pleasant user experience for everybody. Also, just an improved route up to the summit of the Avenues Twin Peaks. We're also looking at implementing a downhill mountain bike trail option, kind of from the highest point of the Bonneville Shoreline Trail on that South City Creek Ridgeline, all the way down to the trailhead at the on Bonneville Boulevard. Again, we would hope that that would be something really fun for bikers, and it would also pull a lot of bikers off of other trail segments and improve the experience for other users. And then also proposing a multi-use trail on Morris Mountain, a new loop trail kind of above Memory Grove and lower City Creek, below the City Creek gate, that would allow a lot of people to get off of Bonneville Boulevard itself and have a soft surface trail option. And then a few things in the north area, an alternate trail that would climb more gradually out of City Creek on the north side, and then a trail connection in our north foothills that would facilitate a number of different loop options, and would really open up the possibility of using this this fire road that goes above the gravel pits and has a lot of great views of the Great Salt Lake. Looking at next steps, we and I don't mean to presume. This should have said to be determined on Planning Commission, but we are scheduled to give a formal presentation to our Parks, Natural Lands, Urban Forestry, and Trails Advisory Board on the 20th, and then at some point we're hoping to come back or have this come back in front of you for a formal meeting. We're also planning to go back to the Bicycle Advisory Committee. We anticipate the City Council reviewing this at least one more time, and then eventually a City Council public hearing and City Council adoption. Next steps beyond adoption and moving forward, we are planning to go after grant funding for phase one from the Utah Outdoor Recreation Grant and the Recreational Trails Program grant, both of which we feel like are great fits for implementation of this trail system. We are in the process of working on construction and maintenance agreements with the University of Utah and Utah State Parks. We are also in the process of initiating the NEPA process with the U.S. Forest Service. We are exploring maintenance funding partnerships and endowment options, and that's all what we're working on now. And then in the probably by 2020, we expect to actually be doing bidding and construction of phase one of the trail system. We would be doing signage development and installation. We'll probably initiate habitat analysis in those habitat study areas later this year, and have those studies continue for a couple of years. Assuming that we can get our trailhead designs funded, the trailhead design, cost estimating, and construction documents would probably happen in 2020, 2021. Obviously, we need to fund, hire, and initiate trail maintenance and management. And then looking a little further out, maybe 4 years out, 5 years out, we'd be fundraising and looking to implement phases 2 and 3 of construction, as well as trailhead improvements. And then ultimately, within the next 5 to 10 years, we would like to amend this trails plan to also include that southern section from Immigration Canyon down to Parley's. And thank you. I think that's my whole presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Have you talked with Salt Lake County for any funding for the build out or maintenance?
We haven't, and we expect the county will actually be a really important source of funding, especially our planned phase 2 is going to be a heavy lift. It'll be between $1.5 and $2 million probably, and it's much more than we're likely to be able to come up with from CIP funds or grants. And I think that the county, a couple different sources at the county will probably be perfect for that.
Yeah, I know they've set aside some funds for trails, and they particularly like projects that there's some matching funds coming from the city that's going to be running it, and which clearly it sounds like that's going to happen.
Absolutely.
Possible open space and trail bonds coming up in the near future that might also be helpful. So
That's right.
this is so great. I mean, I think it's a beautiful presentation of the amenities that we have in our city, and I mean, you almost want to like use it as advertisement for coming to our place, but then you kind of don't, because then you don't want to have it overused. But it's really beautiful. You did a great job.
Stay away.
Yeah, I commend you guys for this plan and this effort. I can only imagine what it took to get this done, and particularly the wayfinding piece, as someone who hikes on these trails and just sort of like hopes I end up where I think I'm going to end up. You know, that is so critically important. And I would say I think that's a big hurdle and something that it's a barrier for people to actually use the trail if they don't have that background knowledge. They didn't grow up here. They're not married to someone who hikes a lot. You know, it's hard to access if you don't have that, you know, pretty high threshold level of knowledge. So critically important.
When I first started working at the city as an intern in 2011, I thought, okay, in the transportation division, I thought, okay, I need to know the Jordan River Trail better. So I took the Jordan River Trail, tried to take it home, and ended up in West Valley. I live in Sugar House. and then a couple of years later, working for Alta Planning and Design, we did the Jordan River Trail wayfinding study, and then those signs went in. And then when this started, I don't know, maybe a year before it started, I went for my first mountain bike ride on the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and ended up incredibly lost. Yeah, in West Valley. And then luckily got to work on the plan, and so it's nice that Salt Lake City seems to just be doing projects to keep me from getting lost. It's really helpful.
So, Louis, I have kind of a technical question, because I'm very familiar with all the work you've done on this, and as always, I'm always so impressed by everything you do. You just raise the bar on the projects you work on every time I see them, so this is no exception. I'm wondering, I like how many access points you've identified along these 3 zones, and maybe this is also a precursor to when you do the next phase for the more difficult parts of the checkerboard ownership. One of the things that came up a couple of years ago with you was identifying where we had public easements that were forgotten. And I know you did a lot of work to figure those out. I guess I'm curious, did any of those access points you identified in this correlate to some of those easements, or do those type of easements come more into play further south?
That's a great question. After quite a bit of looking, there weren't as many of those as I maybe had initially thought. But yes, the answer is there are at least 2 of those that we sort of rediscovered that are included here within this portion of the plan, and then there would be probably at least 2 or 3 others that would come into play down in the southern section when we take that on.
Yeah, I really am pleased with how many access points you've identified of varying levels, that you have different tiers along this section. I feel like it's very well distributed, and as always, you do a great job. So I was just curious how that kind of played out? Because I know that was a lot of work. But so thanks, Lewis.
That's incredibly, we're still looking into several of them. But yeah.
So I also want to say, great job, really love this, love how it's going in. I have one little comment, and I just want to make sure, on these wayfinding signs, it says, you know, all the things that are going to be there, including rules, regulations, trail descriptions. Are those descriptions going to say roughly how long, you know, not only how in miles, but in time? Because I see that in the report. I want to make sure those are all on the map, because I think that's as helpful as anything.
And is the sign example you're looking at, is it the kind of larger kiosk sign that would go at a trailhead with a map on it?
Right, and it's,
Yeah.
this one's generic, saying Foothill logo, map panel, telling me what's going to be on it. I just want to make sure it says a 2-hour loop, you know, 2.5 mile,
2 hours
or whatever.
for you hiking, or 3
Well,
for me.
but there's a general, I mean, there's generally, it's plan on X. I see that at every state, national park I go to.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure that people have a sense of, you know, strenuous or not, or, so that there's an element, as she says, if I have never done this trail, I want a little information about what I'm getting into. I want
Absolutely.
to make sure that's on there.
I think that what we're there's a lot of information that you could attempt to put on us, so I think what we will likely look to do is, at the 5 major trailheads where we anticipate the majority of people would access the trail system, we will probably have more of like a, you know, kind of a larger kiosk, or even several kiosks, so that we could, you know, we wouldn't have to cram everything into a single sign, and could spread it out and have loop information and things about, you know, elevation gain anticipated for different trails. And then probably at the, you know, at the minor trailheads, it might just be a single sign with some of that information, but not all of it.
I think that's smart, and even for more information, www in the website, so that
Exactly.
if I need more and I'm in the middle of the trail, where, you know, how do I get out of here?
Exactly.
Okay.
And we have reserved 2 different websites that we're anticipating using for that.
Great. Looks
you.
so
That's a great
good.
comment.
Really, really excited to see this.
So, I hate to even bring this up, but I'm going to. I live on East Capitol Boulevard on the way up to Ensign Peak, and it's got to be one of the most overused trails, with a lot of spillage along the sides and erosion, both on the trail itself.
Ensign Peak
Trail.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't see that, I don't see that in here. I know it's a really, really actively used trail, one of the most, I mean, when I'm on outside on my street, I will get stopped by everybody going by. How do I get to Inside Trail? So I'm wondering, does this system plan include anything for that relief of that trail, or anything?
We really want to attempt to pull use to the greatest extent possible from access points or trailheads that are way up in these residential neighborhoods, like the one on Ensign Vista Drive, and pull them down lower to trailheads that are located off of more major thoroughfares. And there is, with the trail that was constructed last year, there's now a very nice trail that you can access on Victory Road and climb all the way up Ensign from the backside. It's significantly longer, but also much more gradual than that front side trail. And so Ensign Peak, that is it is a special challenge, because it is so famous. It gets over 150,000 visitors a year, and many of them are tourists or visitors who, you know, they see the temple, and they go to Ensign Peak, and
One of the 10
their
things you're
tour
supposed
bus
to do.
takes them up
Yeah.
there and dumps them off, and you know that. Yeah, so we are looking at aggressively trying to, as the trail system comes together, aggressively promoting a lower trailhead as the jumping off point for Ensign Peak. And then I think the other piece of that is people in check. And I think it's a combination of, parking enforcement and controlling the littering and making sure that people aren't up there at 3 a.m. starting bonfires. It's
They are.
it's a unique challenge.
Is there technology, maybe you said this, but is there technology to use, maybe you don't want to use a technology on a trail, but to use an app and GPS to help people locate that they're going the right way and find their way around as sort of a component of the wayfinding?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of apps that people are already using to do that to some degree. I think,
Can you load in the trails and so it
Yeah,
knows
so I
that you're
think
on the trail?
all
Strava,
all trails.
All trails will do it for you.
Okay.
And we're working with our IMS department. They're kind of on notice that we're planning to come to them once we have a final version of our trail network, that we load the map and have a sort of city-managed online platform. And I don't know how much effort they're going to put into that functionality, but it would be really nice. And I think that it seems like, especially 2-3 years from now, that probably will be quite possible.
And then my last comment, I love the urban connection too, and mapping how you can go from somewhere in the city, even if you have to go on roads for a little while, to get there. But I think that's a really neat way to connect to those spaces as well. So I would love emphasis on that too.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night. We're adjourned.